Let me start with the moment, because honestly the moment is everything. There's a Vreth commander, and if you don't know what a Vreth commander looks like, imagine something built like a tank, wrapped in a tank, and then given the personality of a tank that's had a very bad morning. 9 feet tall, carapace like black volcanic glass, 4 upper limbs, each one capable of bending a standard Durasteel support beam into a loose knot. Eyes like amber searchlights that haven't learned how to blink because blinking is apparently something the Vreth consider optional and possibly cowardly. This particular commander, his name was Vrechthel, Commander Superior of the Vreth 6th Orbital Fleet, was standing in the middle of Concourse 4 on Reach Station Omega-7, surrounded by 8 of his personal guard units, in full military armor, with every galactic security checkpoint in a 2-kilometer radius locked down by his authority, because he decided that morning that a diplomatic transit inspection meant he got to personally inspect whatever he pleased. And across from him, maybe 12 feet of open air between them, which felt like nothing and also felt like the entire universe, was Myra Calloway. Myra Calloway, who was 34 years old, from the East Tennessee mountains, who had a mechanical engineer's certification from the University of New Knoxville, and a Galactic Trade Commission license that let her move cargo through 12 different port systems, and who was currently holding a beat-up, scratched-up, absolutely ancient socket wrench that she'd had since her first job out of school. And Commander Vrechthel was looking at that wrench the way you'd look at something you found mildly amusing. That, he said, in the translated voice that Vreth communicators produce, which sounds like a rockslide slowly becoming a language, is not a weapon. Myra looked down at the wrench. She looked back up at him. She grinned. "Depends who's holding it," she said. I had my recorder running. I always have my recorder running, but I want to tell you honestly, for a full 3 seconds after she said that, I forgot I was a journalist. I forgot I was supposed to be observing. I was just a person in that hallway with everyone else, holding my breath, wondering what in the 7 systems was about to happen next. What happened next changed the way I think about humanity. What happened next changed the way the Vreth think about humanity, too. And I was there for all of it. Section II, the setup. Let me back up, because context matters and I don't want you reading this and thinking Myra Calloway just wandered into a standoff with an alien fleet commander by accident. Well, she kind of did. But there's important background. Reach Station Omega-7 is not a glamorous posting. I want to be clear about that. The glamorous stations are the ones you see in the GNN recruitment brochures, stations like Helix Prime or the Concordance Hub, where the architecture is designed to impress, and there are actual restaurants that serve food made from real ingredients, and the corridors are wide enough that 2 fully suited cargo loaders can pass each other without somebody losing a shoulder. Those stations are beautiful. Those stations have lighting that doesn't flicker at 300 hours and temperature regulation that actually works and enough staff to make things feel, functional. Omega-7 is not those stations. Omega-7 sits at the edge of the outer meridian belt, which is the galactic community's polite way of saying it sits at the edge of where anyone particularly cares to maintain things properly. The station has been operating for 61 years. It shows. The corridors are narrow and smell faintly of recycled air and machine oil, and whatever the Keth food vendors in Concourse 2 are cooking at any given hour, which is usually something that smells incredible if you don't think too hard about what it probably is. The docking arms creak when large ships attach, not dangerously, the engineers assure us, just expressively. The station has opinions about large ships. It expresses them. About 4,000 people live and work on Omega-7 on a permanent basis. Another 2,000 to 3,000 pass through on any given rotation, cargo haulers, diplomats in transit, merchants, the occasional xenobiologist who wants access to the belt's survey drones, and people like me. Journalists who got assigned the outer Meridian beat, because the senior correspondents got the glamorous stations, and someone has to cover the edge. I'd been on Omega 7 for about 4 months when the Vreth transit happened. I want to explain the Vreth, because they're central to everything that follows, and I think a lot of people in the human reading audience have only a vague sense of who they are. The Vreth are one of the 11 major galactic powers, which means they have a seat on the Galactic Community Council, which means they have the kind of institutional weight that makes things like customs inspections complicated. They evolved in high-gravity environments on a world called Vrek Pathos, which produced physiology built for endurance and strength that makes human physical capability look like a rough draft. They live, on average, about 300 Terran years. They have a military tradition that goes back roughly 8,000 years. They do not, historically, lose wars. They also have what I can only describe as a deeply ingrained cultural assumption that size, age, and military record produce a kind of natural right to authority. They're not malicious about it mostly. It's not cruelty. It's more like the galaxy-scale version of that person who walks through every door first, because it has simply never occurred to them that waiting might be appropriate. Commander Vrechthel embodied this completely. He had arrived at Omega 7 aboard the cruiser Vrexaleth, which means, roughly, unbroken stone in the Vreth primary language, with a diplomatic transit authorization that allowed him to pass through the station en route to the Meridian Council meetings without going through standard docking protocols. Standard docking protocols on Omega 7 are already fairly light. The commander's transit authorization essentially made them theoretical. This should have been fine. Diplomatic transits happen on Omega 7 fairly regularly. Usually the dignitary or official comes aboard, uses the dedicated diplomatic corridor, Concourse 7, which is wider and better lit and smells marginally less like Keth cooking, moves to the transit lounge, has a meal or a rest period, and reboards their vessel without much incident. Commander Vrechthel, however, had decided that a transit inspection meant he had the right to inspect the station's cargo handling facilities. Specifically, he'd received a report, from which source I was never able to confirm, that the station was handling cargo that violated galactic community trade restriction codes regarding certain materials the Vreth had flagged as militarily sensitive. The term the galactic community uses for militarily sensitive materials is Grade 7 controlled substance. And when a dignitary with a Grade 7 inspection mandate starts walking through your station corridors with 8 armored guards, your security staff has a genuinely difficult decision to make. They can escalate, contact the station director, contact galactic security, initiate a formal protest, but all of that takes time and generates political friction. Or they can step back and let the inspection happen, which is uncomfortable but technically within the commander's transit rights under Galactic Community Accord 742, the Transit Inspection Clause, which was added to the Accord in 2301 primarily because the Vreth lobbied for it. Station Director Henriksen, good woman, steady nerves, 17 years on Omega 7, chose a middle path. She sent a security liaison to accompany Commander Vrechtel's inspection. She notified Galactic Security, who were, characteristically, 40 minutes away from being able to provide any useful response. She started making calls to the Galactic Community Diplomatic Office. And she did not, because she had no particular reason to anticipate it, redirect the commander away from Concourse 4. Concourse 4 is the station's primary human cargo corridor. It's where human-operated cargo haulers dock, offload, onload, and generally conduct the business of moving things from one part of the galaxy to another. On the morning of the incident, a Tuesday, Terran calendar, not that the day of the week means much this far from Earth, there were 11 human cargo vessels docked or in the process of docking along Concourse 4's berths. About 60 human crew members were working in the corridor or moving through it. One of them was Myra Calloway. She'd been on Omega-7 for 3 days. Her ship, the Tennyson's Ghost, a mid-range hauler, about 40 years old but maintained with the kind of obsessive care that good independent haulers give their ships, was docked at berth 14, and she was in the middle of a routine port inspection of her own. The Galactic Trade Commission requires independent haulers to conduct periodic mechanical inspections of their vessels' docking interfaces, because the docking interface is where a ship is most vulnerable to portside system errors, and the GTC doesn't trust port maintenance crews to always catch those errors, which honestly, having seen port maintenance crews on several outerbelt stations, is a reasonable institutional distrust. So Myra was doing her inspection. She had a diagnostic tablet in one hand and the socket wrench in the other, and she was checking the coupling seals on her docking clamps, which is the kind of work that requires kneeling down in awkward positions and occasionally swearing at things that haven't been tightened properly by the last person who touched them. That was the scene when Commander Vrechthel's inspection party turned the corner onto Concourse 4. 60 human cargo workers in the corridor, human ships in the berths, the smells of machine oil and recycled air and someone's coffee, real coffee, somebody had the good stuff, and the background noise of cargo systems cycling and the distant thrum of the station's main drive ring. And a woman on her knees next to a docking clamp with a wrench in her hand. I was about 30 meters up the corridor when the commander's party came in. I'd been following the inspection because that was my job, staying close enough to observe without getting in the way, which meant staying close enough that the security liaison kept giving me looks, but not close enough that he felt the need to say anything. Vrechthel's guard contingent was moving in formation, 4 in front, 4 flanking the commander, and the commander himself was scanning the corridor with those amber searchlight eyes, which is how Vreth inspect things, with their full sensory apparatus engaged, because Vreth perception includes a low-level vibrational sense that lets them detect structural anomalies in materials just by looking carefully enough. The corridor's human occupants were reacting the way humans generally react to a 9-foot armored alien commander with a military guard unit walking through their workspace, which is to say, quietly and carefully, and with the instinct to not make sudden moves. People were stepping back. People were finding things to do that happened to be on the walls rather than in the main thoroughfare. The human sense of self-preservation is a well-calibrated instrument. Myra Calloway was not doing any of that. Myra Calloway was still on her knees next to the docking clamp, head down, running her diagnostic tablet over a coupling seal that was apparently giving her trouble, completely unaware that a Vreth inspection party had just walked into her concourse. She found out when Commander Vrechthel stopped approximately 2 meters from her and said, in the carrying tone of someone who has never needed to project his voice and does so automatically, "Human, what are you doing?" She looked up. I was watching her face when she first saw him. There was a very quick sequence of expressions, surprise, followed by assessment, followed by something that settled into calm. Not performed calm, not the careful neutral face people put on when they're actually scared and trying not to show it. Actual calm, the kind of calm that comes from not being particularly threatened by large things. "Inspection," she said, turning back to the coupling seal and running her tablet over it again. "Give me a second, I think this port seal's been over-torqued." There was a pause. I watched the commander's guard units exchange what I can only describe as uncertain looks, which on armored Vreth soldiers is subtle but visible if you know what you're looking for. "You are in the path of an authorized inspection," Commander Vrechthel said. "So am I," Myra said pleasantly, not looking up. Another pause. Longer this time. Section III the build. I should say, at this point, that I've been a journalist covering the human galactic beat for 11 years. I've been on 12 different stations, 4 planetary surfaces, 2 deep space survey ships, and one extremely uncomfortable 6-week posting on a Keth diplomatic vessel, where the atmospheric processing was calibrated for Keth respiration, and I spent the whole time mildly dizzy. I've seen a lot of interactions between humans and members of other galactic species. I have a reasonably calibrated sense of when an interaction is routine and when it is not. This interaction was not routine. The thing about the Vreth, specifically, is that they operate on a cultural principle that translates roughly as rank acknowledgement priority, meaning that the established social order of any given situation should be immediately legible to everyone involved, and behavior should align with that legible order. A commander superior of the Vreth 6th Orbital Fleet does not have the experience of being treated as an inconvenience by a woman with a wrench. It is not part of the Vreth social framework that this is a thing that happens. Their culture has 8,000 years of military tradition and about 6,000 years of galactic community interaction behind it. And in all of that time, in all of those interactions, the size and rank and armor of a Vreth commander has reliably communicated something that living things in proximity reliably respond to. Myra Calloway was not responding to it. Not because she was being defiant, not yet, that came later, but because she was genuinely absorbed in the Port Seal issue, which apparently was a more pressing concern to her at that moment than the 9-foot armored being standing 2 meters away. That's such a human thing. I've thought about this a lot since. The way humans will be in the middle of a thing, and continue to be in the middle of that thing, even when the surrounding circumstances change dramatically, because the thing matters and the thing needs to be finished. It's maddening and it's admirable, and it is, I think, deeply destabilizing to species that operate on clearer hierarchy signals. The security liaison, a young Omega-7 staff member named Darrett, half Keth, good instincts, absolutely miserable morning, moved forward from his position behind the guard unit and cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "this is a commander superior of the Vreth 6th Fleet. There's an authorized inspection in progress." "I heard him," Myra said. "I'm also doing an authorized inspection." She finally looked up at Darrett, and there was nothing unfriendly in her expression. "GTC requires a coupling seal check every 400-hour docking interval. This one's overdue. I need 2 more minutes." "The commander's inspection takes priority under Accord 742, Darrett said, with the slightly apologetic tone of someone who knows they're saying something unfortunate. "Then he can inspect around me," Myra said reasonably. "There's plenty of corridor." She looked at the commander's guard units. "Plenty of room. You guys are big but not that big." One of the guard units made a sound. I genuinely couldn't tell if it was offense or laughter. With Vreth soldiers, sometimes those are the same sound. Commander Vrechthel stepped forward. Not aggressively, not yet, but with the measured, deliberate pace of someone who expects the act of stepping forward to produce a response. He stopped about 1.5 meters from Myra, looking down at her. The height differential was significant. Even kneeling, she was looking up at him, and standing she would have come up to approximately the middle of his chest. "Human worker," he said, and the rockslide quality of his translated voice had picked up something, not quite irritation, more like the early stages of incomprehension. "You are impeding an authorized galactic community inspection of this facility's cargo operations." Myra looked at the socket wrench in her hand. She looked at the diagnostic tablet. She looked back up at Commander Vrechthel. "I'm inspecting my cargo operations," she said. "This is my ship. That's my docking clamp. That's my coupling seal that somebody overtorqued at last port." She tilted her head slightly. "Is there a specific cargo you're looking for? Because I can tell you right now what's in the Tennyson's Ghost. It's agricultural equipment and medical supply components for the Meridian Belt relief stations, all properly manifested, nothing restricted." She picked up the diagnostic tablet and turned it toward him. "Want to see the manifest?" There was a quality to the pause that followed that I can only describe as weight. The corridor had gone very quiet. The other cargo workers in Concourse 4 had stopped what they were doing. Everyone was watching. Commander Vrechthel did not look at the manifest. "You will move," he said. He wasn't shouting. Vreth commanders at this level of authority rarely need to shout. The statement was simply, absolute, final. The way a law of physics is final. Myra looked at the coupling seal. She looked at the commander. "I need 90 more seconds," she said. "Human." "I'm not going to leave an overtorqued coupling seal unlogged," she said patiently, turning back to the seal. "If I leave it unlogged and it fails during departure and I lose pressure in the docking interface, that's my problem and it's the station's problem and it's a safety incident. I'll be 90 seconds. You can time me." The guard units were looking at the commander now. Not with any particular concern. Vreth soldiers don't do visible concern, but with an attention that suggested they were recalibrating their expectations of how this interaction was going to go. I had my recorder running. I was barely breathing. Commander Vrechthel stood very still for a moment. And then he did something that, in 11 years of covering human galactic interactions, I had never seen a Vreth commander do. He waited. Not patiently, not pleasantly, but he waited. Stood there with his guard units in formation, amber eyes fixed on the woman with the socket wrench, and waited while she finished logging the coupling seal diagnostic with the careful, deliberate thoroughness of someone who finishes what she starts. 90 seconds, maybe 100, honestly, she was thorough. Then she stood up, brushed her knees off, tucked the diagnostic tablet under her arm, held the socket wrench loosely at her side. "Thank you," she said. She looked up at Commander Vrechthel. "Now, what cargo are you actually looking for? I'll save you time." The commander's posture had changed. I noticed it then, a subtle shift in how he was holding himself. Not threatening, something more like reassessment. "We have intelligence that this section of the station is handling restricted materials," he said. "Specifically, thermal induction capacitors rated above galactic community standard output levels." "Those exist on Omega-7, Myra said calmly. The commander's eyes sharpened. "They're in the engineering bay," she continued. "Berth 7, the Kohler's run. She runs plasma-assisted cargo lifting systems. They need higher output capacitors to run the lifts efficiently. The GTC has a variance permit for modified output systems on heavy lift vessels. You can check it." She tilted her head slightly. "You can also ask Chief Engineer Yusuf, who is probably in Berth 7 right now, and who will absolutely show you every piece of documentation you want. He's thorough about it, probably more thorough than you'd prefer." Another long pause. "You know this," Commander Vrechthel said. "It wasn't quite a question." "I know most people on this concourse," Myra said simply. "We run the same routes, small community." She looked at the commander steadily. "What else are you looking for?" Section IV, the tension rises. I need to describe what was happening in the corridor around this conversation, because I think it matters. The 60-odd human cargo workers in Concourse 4 had been watching this exchange with the kind of focused attention that humans give to things that matter and that they are not going to miss. They hadn't gathered into a crowd exactly. They were still at their stations, their berths, their cargo checks. But they had collectively oriented toward the exchange the way plants orient toward light. Bodies angled in, tools lowered, attention absolute. Humans are social animals. We know our own. We watch each other in ways that are hard to articulate but easy to feel. And what I could see in those 60-odd faces was not fear. None of these people looked frightened, which honestly impressed me, but something more like readiness. A coiled quality. The awareness that something was happening and that they were part of the context in which it was happening. The Vreth Guard units were also watching. I could tell because Vreth soldiers in full formation don't typically angle their sensory apparatus toward peripheral sources unless those sources have become relevant. They were tracking the workers the way you track something that has moved unexpectedly on your perimeter. Commander Vrechthel appeared to notice this too. He had the experience of 8,000 years of military tradition behind him. He could read a space. "You are providing information to facilitate my inspection," he said to Myra. It had the quality of something he was working out as he said it. "I'm trying to save both of us time," she said. "Your intelligence report is probably about 6 weeks old. Things change on a working station. If you want the accurate picture, you ask someone who's been here." She shrugged. "I've been here 3 days, but I'm a quick study." "The Vreth Sixth Fleet does not require assistance from human cargo workers," the commander said. It wasn't quite sharp. It was something more precise than sharp. A statement of order being reasserted. "And here's the moment. This is the moment I've tried to describe in my notes about 15 times and never quite gotten right. So I'm just going to write it and trust that the factual sequence of events carries the truth of it." Myra Calloway looked at Commander Vrechthel, looked up at him. This 9-foot being with the carapace and the amber eyes and the 8 armored soldiers and the full weight of an 8,000-year military tradition. And she smiled. Not a challenging smile. Not a provocative one. The smile of someone who has taken an accurate measurement of a situation and finds it interesting. "With respect, Commander," she said, "you've been in this corridor for 6 minutes and you've gotten more useful operational information from me than your intelligence report gave you." She paused. "The Vreth Sixth Fleet is excellent at many things. Working-class orbital station logistics isn't one of them. That's not an insult, it's a specialization gap." The silence that followed was significant. One of the guard units shifted its weight. Commander Vrechthel looked at Myra Calloway for a long moment, those amber searchlight eyes, unblinking. "You speak with considerable directness," he said finally. "I'm from East Tennessee," she said. "It's a regional trait." He didn't know what East Tennessee was, clearly. The communicator translated it literally, which produced something like Eastern Region of Tennessee, which clearly meant nothing to him. But he seemed to understand the essential point, that she was explaining an origin, not making an apology. "The restricted materials," he said. "You said they are documented." "Variance permit on file with GTC, station copy held by Director Henriksen's office, and Chief Engineer Yusuf can show you the physical documentation." She paused. "Also, Commander, those capacitors are for a cargo lift system. They're not a military application. The Vreth classification code for militarily sensitive materials specifically excludes commercial cargo handling equipment under subsection 4 of the code. So even if the permit weren't there, you'd be looking at a GTC regulatory issue, not a galactic community military concern." Another pause. "Longer." "You know the classification code," Vrechthel said. "I carry cargo through 12 port systems," Myra said. "I have to know the classification code or I can't run a compliant manifest. It's part of the GTC license." She met his eyes steadily. "I'm happy to cite the specific subsection if you want to check it." Commander Vrechthel, Commander Superior of the Vreth Sixth Orbital Fleet, 9 feet tall, 8,000-year military tradition, stood very still. Then he said, "Subsection 4, you are certain?" "Subsection 4, paragraph 3, clause 2, Myra said without hesitation. "Commercial cargo handling equipment, including but not limited to loading systems, transfer mechanisms, and their associated power components, are specifically excluded from military-sensitive material classification regardless of rated output capacity, provided the equipment is registered to a commercial operating vessel and in active commercial use." She tilted her head. "I have the GTC Regulations app on my tablet if you want me to pull it up." I watched Commander Vrechtel's carapace do something I later learned is called Vrechschau, a subtle articulation of the exoskeletal plates that, in Vreth body language, indicates a fundamental recalibration of one's assessment of a situation. The xenobiologist who later helped me understand what I'd seen described it as roughly equivalent to a human taking a slow breath to reset. "Your name," the commander said. "Myra Calloway," she said. "I run the Tennyson's Ghost out of New Knoxville, been hauling Meridian Belt routes for 8 years. You have been cited before the Vreth 6th Fleet for an administrative matter." "Not that I'm aware of," she said. "You should be if we had known of you before," he said. It was not an insult. The way he said it was almost something else. "We could use accurate intelligence." "I'm not a spy," Myra said pleasantly. "I'm a hauler, I just pay attention." Section V, the climax. Here is where it escalates. I want to be honest that when I say escalates, I mean the tension ratcheted upward in a specific and unexpected direction, not the direction any of us in the corridor anticipated. Because here is where Captain Bren arrived. Captain Bren was the commander of the station's galactic security detail, Keth-human mixed heritage, compact and efficient, with the kind of measured authority that comes from years of managing situations on outer belt stations, where the backup is always 40 minutes away. He'd been notified about the commander's unscheduled move through Concourse 4, and had come as quickly as his 15-minute response time allowed. He came around the corner with 4 of his own security officers and took in the scene: Commander Vrechthel, 8 guard units, Myra Calloway, socket wrench, 60 silent cargo workers. With the practiced rapid assessment of someone who has seen a lot of scenes and needs to read them fast. "Commander Hal," he said carefully, "I've been asked to facilitate the remainder of your inspection. If you'd like to continue to the cargo documentation office." "The inspection is proceeding here," Commander Vrechthel said. He had not taken his eyes off Myra Calloway. "This human worker is providing accurate intelligence regarding this facility's cargo operations." Captain Bren looked at Myra. Myra gave him a small look that said, essentially, "I know, don't ask, it's fine, I've got it." Captain Bren had been on Omega 7 for 9 years. He was a good reader of small looks. He held his position and let the scene continue. "I have a question," Commander Vrechthel said to Myra. "Sure," she said. "The materials you carry," he said, "agricultural equipment, medical supply components, you carry these to the Meridian Belt relief stations." "That's correct." "The Meridian Belt relief stations serve populations displaced by the Keth-Vreth boundary negotiations," he said. The phrase was careful, precise, and managed to be technically accurate and also extremely euphemistic at the same time. The Keth-Vreth boundary negotiations had involved 3 contested planetary systems and approximately 200,000 people who'd had to relocate when the Galactic Community Council drew new administrative lines to resolve the conflict. Displaced was doing a lot of work in that sentence. "Yes," Myra said, her voice stayed even. "You have been running these supply routes for how long?" 8 years. A pause. "The relief stations were established during the first round of negotiations, 8 years ago." Vrechthel was quiet for a moment. "The Keth-Vreth boundary negotiations concluded 3 years ago," he said. "The relief stations are still operational," Myra said. "The community's relocated. They need agricultural equipment. They need medical supplies. The relief authorization was renewed, and the runs are commercially contracted." A pause. "People need the things they need regardless of whether the political situation that displaced them has been resolved." Another significant silence. "I saw something shift in the posture of the guard units. I couldn't have told you what exactly. Vreth soldiers are trained to be still in ways that make subtle shifts subtle, but something had changed in the air of the corridor." "You find this work meaningful," Commander Vrechthel said. It was not a question. He said it with the certainty of someone who has just understood something they had not previously understood. Myra looked at the socket wrench in her hand. She looked back up. "People need the things they need," she said again, simply. "I have a ship. I know the routes. I can do the runs without losing money barely if I pick up commercial cargo on the way back. A small shrug. I've been doing it for 8 years. I'm good at it. You do this, Commander Vrechthel said carefully, for populations partially displaced by Vreth territorial actions. I do this for people who need agricultural equipment and medical supplies, Myra said. She met his eyes. I don't carry a political ledger. The silence after that was different from the previous silences. Those had been pauses in a negotiation, moments of recalibration, of information processing, of authority reasserting itself or being tested. This silence was something more like awe. I don't know how else to describe it. The quality of quiet that happens when something genuinely unexpected has occurred. Then one of the guard units said something. In Vreth, no translation, just the raw sounds of it, which are deep and resonant and not comfortable for human ears at high volume. I couldn't understand it, obviously. Commander Vrechtel's communicator was the only translation device in the party, and the guard hadn't been speaking to me. But Vrechtel turned to look at the guard, and then he turned back to Myra. My officer, he said, wishes to know if the tool you carry is a weapon. Myra looked at the socket wrench. She looked at Commander Vrechtel. And she grinned. That's not a weapon, the commander translated his officer's statement. Depends who's holding it, Myra said. I had my recorder. It was running, but I want to be clear that the device captured the sounds, not the feeling. The feeling was the corridor holding its breath, 60 human cargo workers and 8 Vreth soldiers and 1 bewildered security liaison and 1 veteran journalist all suspended in the same moment, waiting. The Vreth warrior tradition, Commander Vrechtel said slowly, holds that a tool becomes a weapon through the character of its holder. A stone in the hand of a child is a stone. A stone in the hand of a warrior is a weapon. He paused. My officer suggests that this human, who carries cargo to displaced populations, who knows the classification codes better than officers who are supposed to enforce them, who does not move when she does not need to move, may be demonstrating this principle. Myra blinked. I was just making a joke, she said. The best statements, Commander Vrechtel said, are both. There was a moment, one of those moments that journalists live for, that you can feel in the room before you can name what it is, and then the corridor exhaled. The held breath released. Someone behind me made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and something more complicated. I heard it ripple through the cargo workers, the recognition that the tension had resolved into something unexpected, something that wasn't a confrontation and wasn't a defeat, and wasn't what any of them had been braced for. I want to be careful here. I want to not overstate what happened. Commander Vrechtel was still a 9-foot armored being with an inspection authority he hadn't relinquished. Myra was still a hauler with a socket wrench. The institutional dynamics of the galactic community hadn't shifted. The Keth-Vreth boundary situation hadn't become simpler. None of that changed. But something in that corridor changed. And I've spent the months since this incident trying to figure out exactly what to call it. Section VI, the resolution. What happened immediately after? Commander Vrechtel did continue his inspection, but he did it with Myra Calloway walking alongside him. I don't know exactly how that happened. There wasn't a formal agreement. It seemed to occur naturally, the way things sometimes do when two people have discovered an unexpected common language. She walked beside him through Concourse 4, answering his questions about the cargo operations, pointing out systems and quirks, and the informal knowledge that only comes from working a route for years, and his guard units formed around them in a configuration that was technically escort but looked, from the outside, very much like accompaniment. Captain Bren followed at a careful distance. His expression was one I recognized from the faces of people who are watching something they'll be describing for the rest of their careers. I followed too. My recorder ran. The inspection reached berth 7, the Kohler's run, and Chief Engineer Yusuf did indeed produce the variant's permit documentation with the kind of thorough cheerfulness that comes from a man who likes being right about paperwork and has always suspected this day would come. Commander Vrechthel reviewed the documentation, acknowledged the subsection Myra had cited, and flagged the variants as consistent with GTC regulations. The restricted materials concern was resolved. Formally, completely in the record. Then Commander Vrechthel asked to see Myra's ship. She said, "Sure." I want to be clear that I almost dropped my recorder at this point. A Vreth Commander Superior requesting a tour of a 40-year-old human cargo hauler is not in the standard operating procedures for anything. It is not a thing that happens. It's not a thing that's happened before, as far as I can tell from the GNN archive search I conducted afterward. But Myra led him down to berth 14, and she showed him the Tennyson's Ghost. I'm going to describe that ship because I think it matters. The Tennyson's Ghost is not impressive on the exterior. She's scratched and patched and carries the accumulated character of 4 decades in service, which means she has welded repairs on the starboard hull plating and non-factory lighting on the cargo bay deck, because the factory lighting burned out in year 26, and the replacement was sourced from a Keth salvage market and isn't quite the right color temperature. She smells of machine oil and recycled air, and something faintly botanical that Myra couldn't explain to me later. She thought it might be the agricultural equipment residue from the last load, which had carried seeds in pressurized containers, and some particulate had gotten into the ventilation. She's also maintained with extraordinary care. Every system is logged and documented. The mechanical work is precise. The things that need to work, work. The things that need to be calibrated are calibrated. The coupling seals are inspected on schedule, or Myra gets on her knees in a station corridor with a socket wrench, and does it herself even when a Vreth commander is standing over her. Commander Vrechthel walked through the Tennyson's Ghost with the deliberate attention he'd given the concourse inspection, except that now he was asking questions that weren't about cargo restrictions. He asked about the agricultural routes. He asked about the relief station populations. He asked about the 8 years of runs. He asked once about East Tennessee, what kind of place it was, what kind of terrain. Mountains, Myra said, not like space mountains, actual mountains. Old ones worn down, covered in trees. She thought about it. Green, everything's green in the spring. The commander was quiet for a moment. The Vreth homeworld, he said, is primarily stone and mineral formations. We do not have what you would call vegetation on a significant scale. That sounds beautiful in a different way, Myra said. It is very hard, he said. That is considered beautiful. Sure, Myra said. Hard things can be beautiful. She showed him the cargo bay. She showed him the medical supply components, properly manifested, sitting in their transfer containers. She showed him the agricultural equipment, soil analyzers, seed processors, irrigation calibrators, packed for the Meridian Belt stations. He stood in her cargo bay for a while, looking at the equipment. These populations, he said, they were relocated to what environments? Rocky, Myra said. Mineral formations, not a lot of existing agriculture. They're building new systems from scratch. She paused. The soil analyzers help them figure out what'll grow. The seed processors let them start with the right varieties for the soil chemistry. Another pause. It's 8 years in. They're starting to produce their own food locally. They don't need as much from outside as they did. Commander Vrechthel looked at the soil analyzers for a long time. The thing about Vreth expressions is that they don't map cleanly to human ones. They don't have the facial musculature for it. But there's something in the orientation of those amber eyes, the way they focus and the way they hold, that communicates something. I've decided to call it weight, because that's the closest I can get. The way his eyes held the soil analyzers had weight. The rocky terrain of their relocation sites, he said carefully. Does it resemble Vreth homeworld terrain? Myra said quietly. A little, yeah, from the surveys I've seen. A long pause. I did not know this, Vrechthel said. I know, Myra said. She didn't say it harshly. She said it gently, the way you'd say something true to someone who was hearing it for the first time and needed a moment to hold it properly. It's in the GTC cargo documentation. You'd have to know to look for it. Section VII, Aftermath and the moment that mattered most. I've been trying to figure out the right way to write this next part for the 3 months since the incident happened. I've written and deleted and rewritten. I've talked to other journalists about it, and to a xenobiologist friend who specializes in Vreth cultural studies, and to Captain Bren, who was in the cargo bay and saw it too. Here's what I've settled on. I'm just going to tell you what I saw and let it be what it is. Commander Vrechthel stood in the cargo bay of the Tennyson's Ghost for a long moment after Myra said it's in the GTC cargo documentation. You'd have to know to look for it. His guard units were outside the bay. The bay wasn't big enough for everyone. So it was him and Myra and Captain Bren and me and the soil analyzers and the medical supply components. Then Commander Vrechthel said something in Vreth, not to his communicator, not formally, just something quiet and direct in the language of his people. His communicator picked it up and translated it a beat later, the way communicators do when they're set to ambient translation mode. What it translated was, we made them a stone world. They learned to make the stone grow. Myra didn't answer that. There wasn't really an answer to it. After a moment, Commander Vrechthel turned to look at her, those amber eyes. The tool, he said. He looked at the socket wrench, which she was still carrying in her right hand. She'd had it the whole time through the concourse, through the berths, through the cargo bay. You would not put it down. It's my wrench, she said. Yes, he said. Something in his tone had changed from the beginning of the interaction to this point. Not softer exactly, I don't think Vreth voices do soft, but different, like a large rock that has found a stable resting position. In the Vreth warrior tradition, the personal tool is significant. The thing a warrior carries that is not a weapon but is always carried. It is the thing that tells you what the warrior serves. Myra looked at the wrench. I'm not a warrior, she said. No, Vrechthel agreed. You are something that does not have a Vreth word. He paused, those amber eyes holding her steady. A being who carries the tool of their service always, who knows the codes that protect others, who does not move when they do not need to move, who does not carry a political ledger. This is not a Vreth warrior, but my language has a word for what it is. What word? Myra asked. Vrexaleth, he said. It is the name of my ship. I looked that up afterward. Vrexaleth translates to unbroken stone. But the xenobiologist I spoke to told me that in military Vreth usage, Vrexaleth has a secondary meaning, a connotation that doesn't translate directly into galactic standard. The closest she could get to it was a thing that does not break under weight because it never needed to be brittle. Myra looked at the commander for a long moment. Then she held out the socket wrench. You want to hold it, she said, for the tradition thing. Commander Vrechthel looked at the wrench. He looked at Myra. He reached out one of his upper limbs, each one longer than her entire arm, and took the wrench from her hand. He held it carefully. A battered, scratched-up, absolutely ancient socket wrench from a woman's first job out of school, held in the hand of a 9-foot Vreth commander superior. He looked at it. It is not a weapon, he said. Myra smiled. No, she agreed. But in the hands of someone who knows what they're doing, it's fixed about 400 docking clamps and kept the Tennyson's Ghost running for 8 years of relief supply routes. She paused. So. Commander Vrechthel turned the wrench over once. Carefully. The way you handle something you understand has value, even if the value isn't immediately visible on the surface. Then he handed it back. I will recommend to the Galactic Community Council, he said. That the Meridian Belt Relief Station supply authorization be reviewed for extension. The current documentation indicates the need remains active. Myra took the wrench back. "Thank you," she said. "I'm not doing this as thanks," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm thanking you." He looked at her for another long moment. "East Tennessee," he said. "The mountains that are old and worn and covered in growing things." "That's the place," she said. "There is a quality in old mountains," he said slowly, "that young mountains do not have. They are less dramatic, they do not make you afraid, but they were here before anything else and they will be here after, and nothing has broken them." He paused. "I have flown over old mountains on other worlds. I understand them better than I understood before today that humans come from them." He left the cargo bay. His guard units fell into formation around him. He walked through Concourse 4 and back through the diplomatic corridor, and he reboarded the Vrexaleth and departed Omega 7 on schedule. Captain Bren stood in the cargo bay with Myra and me for a moment after he'd gone. "That," Captain Bren said carefully, "was not what I expected when I came around that corner." "No," Myra agreed. "You were genuinely finishing your coupling seal inspection," he said, "when he first arrived." "Seal was over-torqued," she said. "I'm not leaving an over-torqued seal unlogged." Captain Bren looked at the socket wrench. "The subsection 4 citation," he said. "Did you actually know that, or did you look it up on the tablet while you were pretending to show him the manifest?" Myra smiled. She didn't answer. "Section VII, the larger thing. I've been sitting with this incident for 3 months. I filed 5 stories about it, the initial news report, a follow-up on the Galactic Community Council recommendation that Commander Vrechthel submitted 4 days after his departure. It passed. The Meridian Belt Relief Supply authorization was extended by 8 years. A piece on the human cargo hauler community's reaction to the incident. A longer analytical piece on Vreth-human relations in the outer Meridian region. And now this, the full account. The one I wanted to write from the beginning, but needed time to get right. Here's what I keep coming back to. The galactic community is enormous. It contains 11 major powers and dozens of smaller ones, hundreds of inhabited worlds, thousands of years of diplomatic history, and a bureaucratic infrastructure of staggering complexity. The Galactic Community Accord runs to 16 volumes. The trade regulations alone are 3 volumes. The dispute resolution protocols are 2 more. We have formal mechanisms for almost everything. For territorial conflicts and trade disputes and diplomatic incidents and everything in between. And here's what those mechanisms are not very good at. The small specific true things. The Keth-Vreth boundary negotiations are in the Accord. The relief station authorization is in the GTC records. The variance permits are filed and documented. All of that is true and formal and recorded. What is not in any of those documents is that a woman from East Tennessee had been running agricultural equipment and medical supplies to displaced communities for 8 years, quietly, on routes that barely broke even, because people needed the things they needed and she had a ship and knew the routes. That fact existed outside the formal mechanisms. It was in the cargo manifests if you knew to look. It was in the knowledge of everyone who worked the Meridian Belt routes. It was in Myra Calloway's hands every time she picked up that socket wrench. Commander Vrechthel came to Omega 7 to inspect for restricted materials that might represent a military threat. He found instead a woman who knew his classification codes better than he expected and carried soil analyzers to people his government had relocated to rocky terrain. And he went back to the Galactic Community Council and recommended extending the supply authorization. The xenobiologist I spoke to told me that the Vrexaleth designation is significant in Vreth culture. It's not an honor exactly. They don't give honors to non-Vreth, or they hadn't, historically, but it's a category. a real category in their framework for understanding what kinds of beings exist, a thing that does not break under weight because it never needed to be brittle. She told me she'd spent 30 years studying Vreth culture and had never heard of a Vreth commander applying that category to a human. I thought about that for a while. I thought about the moment in the cargo bay when Commander Vrechthel held Myra's wrench. 9 feet of alien commander superior, 8,000 years of military tradition, the weight of a territorial conflict that had displaced 200,000 people, and in his hand, a beat-up socket wrench from a woman's first job out of school. And what he said, it is not a weapon. And what she agreed, no. The thing she didn't say, but that I've been thinking about ever since, is, it didn't need to be. It already was what it needed to be. It was the thing she'd used to fix 400 docking clamps and keep a 40-year-old ship running on routes that barely broke even for 8 years of carrying soil analyzers to people learning to make stone ground grow. The wrench was exactly what it was, and it turned out that was enough. Section IX, Myra Calloway's statement. 3 weeks after the incident, I asked Myra Calloway if she'd be willing to sit for a formal statement for the GNN archive. She was back on Omega 7. She comes through every 6 weeks or so on the Meridian Belt run, and we talked in the station's third-tier common area, which has better coffee than anywhere else on the station and worse seating, which is how Omega 7 makes every choice. I'm going to reproduce her statement here in full, because it's hers and it deserves to be hers. Statement of Myra Calloway, Independent Cargo Hauler, GTC License 7741M, filed for archive record with GNN, Omega 7 Bureau, Correspondent E. Tolman. I want to be clear about something. I didn't go in there trying to do anything particular. I was fixing my coupling seal. That's what I was doing. It needed to be done and I was doing it. If he'd wanted me to move and it had been an actual emergency, I would have moved. But it wasn't an emergency. It was an inspection, and my inspection was already in progress, so I finished it. The subsection 4 thing, yeah, I know the codes. You have to know the codes if you're going to run compliant manifests through 12 port systems. I didn't look it up on the tablet. I've had those regulations memorized since my 2nd year of hauling because the 3rd time I got flagged for something I thought was compliant but wasn't, I went home and read the full document. 3 volumes, cover to cover. It's not exciting reading, but it's useful reading. The routes, look. The Meridian Belt relief runs, I started doing them because I was already running through the belt and the contract was available and the timing worked. That's the honest version. Then I met the people at the stations and I understood the situation better, and then I just kept going. That's not heroism. That's just having a ship and knowing a route, and honestly, the soil analyzers are kind of interesting. I'm a mechanical engineer. Agricultural soil processing technology is actually fascinating. The calibrations for different mineral compositions, it's genuinely good engineering. So there's also that. The commander, I don't know what to tell you about him that I haven't already said. He was surprised, I think. Not by me specifically. By the situation not being what he expected. That's not unusual. Most situations aren't what you expect out here. You learn to update fast or you don't last long on the belt routes. The wrench. People keep asking about the wrench. It's a socket wrench. I've had it since I was 22 and working my first dock job at New Knoxville Station. It's the first tool I bought with my own money, not borrowed from the shop. I've replaced the handle twice and I've had the head refaced once, but the core mechanism is the original. It works. I'm not sentimental about a lot of things, but I'm sentimental about that. When he asked if it was a weapon, his officer asked through him, I made a joke. Because I make jokes. That's what I do when situations get a little tense. My mother always said I inherited it from my grandmother who made jokes at funerals. Not mean ones. Just the kind of joke that reminds everyone in the room that we're all here and we're all human and that's fine. Or, in that case, not all human, but you know what I mean. Depends who's holding it. I meant it to be funny. And then he said the thing about the Vreth warrior tradition and the personal tool, and I thought, I guess I did mean it both ways. That happens sometimes. You say something and you find out afterward that you said more than you knew you were saying. I've been running these routes for 8 years. I'll keep running them for as long as the authorization holds, which is now another 8 years according to the council, which I was glad to hear that. I was genuinely glad to hear that. The communities at the stations have made a lot of progress. They're mostly food stable now from their own production. In a few more years, they might not need the agricultural supply runs at all. I think that'll be a good day. When they call and say they don't need the soil analyzers anymore because their soil is figured out. That'll be a good day. I don't carry a political ledger. I've been asked if that's an ideological statement, and it really isn't. It's a practical statement. I'm a cargo hauler. I can't run a business while keeping track of which cargo is politically appropriate given the full history of the galactic community's territorial decisions. I'd never be able to haul anything. You carry what people need. You do the work. That's the job. The mountains back home, he asked about that later, in a follow-up communication he sent through the GNN diplomatic channel, which was not something I expected. He asked if I'd ever go back. I told him I go back every year when I can. In the spring. Everything's green. The mountains are old and not particularly dramatic, but they've been there for a long time and they'll be there for a long time more, and I find that reassuring. He sent back one word in Vreth. His communicator translated it as understood. I thought that was a good word.